The soft hum of the city seemed like a distant memory as Sophia stared out the window of her modest apartment. The muted colors of her small living space felt like a reflection of her own life, restrained, dulled, and healing from the cracks left by Jacob. A year had passed since the divorce, but the ache lingered, a phantom pain she couldn't shake. Jacob had been her partner for 10 years, but he'd also been her undoing. The discovery of his betrayal had shattered her, not just as a wife, but as a woman who once believed in forever. Sophia had sought refuge in her work. The clean lines and creative freedom of her designs gave her a sense of control when everything else felt chaotic. Yet, even her passion for design couldn't fill the void left by her fractured trust. Seeking solace, she made the decision to leave behind the city's relentless noise and return to her hometown, where the pace of life matched the rhythm of her heart. Home meant her father, Henry, and the house he had built with his own hands decades ago. It stood on the edge of the town, surrounded by acres of gardens he had lovingly tended. For Henry, the gardens were more than just land. They were a testament to resilience, a place where roots ran deep and every bloom carried a story. Sophia found comfort in his company. Henry's steady voice, his weathered hands that held both strength and kindness, reminded her that she was still someone's priority, someone's world. "Life has its seasons, Sophie," he'd often say, his eyes crinkling with wisdom and humor. "You can't rush a bloom, nor can you fight a frost. But the roots, they're always there, holding steady." For Sophia, Henry's words were more than fatherly advice. They were an anchor. In his presence, she began to feel her fragmented heart piece itself back together. It wasn't just the familiarity of her childhood home. It was the connection to a legacy her father had built, one rooted in love, family, and hard work. Unbeknownst to her, the peace she was clinging to was about to be tested in ways she couldn't have imagined. The call came at dawn, shattering the fragile calm Sophia had been building. Her father, Henry, the man who had been her rock, was gone. A sudden heart attack had taken him in the quiet of the night, leaving behind a home filled with memories and a daughter not ready to say goodbye. The news left Sophia hollow, the world around her muted as if the gardens themselves had gone still in mourning. The funeral was a modest affair, attended by friends and neighbors who had admired Henry for his warmth and his unwavering dedication to his family. Sophia stood by his casket, her hand resting on the polished wood, as if trying to draw strength from the man who had always been her safe haven. But mourning was a luxury Sophia barely had time to indulge. Just days after the funeral, her quiet grief was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Vanessa, Jacob's new wife. And, to Sophia's surprise, Jacob himself. They strode into the garden like they owned it, Vanessa's sharp heels clicking against the cobblestones, her crimson lips curled into a smirk that turned Sophia's stomach. "Lovely place," Vanessa remarked, her gaze sweeping the garden. "A bit quaint, but it has potential. Don't you think, Jacob?" Jacob nodded, his expression guarded, though he avoided meeting Sophia's eyes. "What are you doing here?" Sophia demanded, stepping forward, her voice as firm as the roots beneath her feet. Vanessa didn't bother with pleasantries. "We're here to discuss Henry's estate. As you're aware, Jacob was like a son to him. Naturally, we assumed there would be provisions for us in the will." Sophia felt the ground shift beneath her. "What are you talking about? This is my father's home. His estate belongs to me." Vanessa smiled, a sharp, calculated curve of her lips. "Not according to this." She pulled a document from her designer bag, her red-tipped nails tapping it triumphantly. Sophia's hands trembled as she took the paper, her eyes scanning the text. It was a will, or at least it appeared to be. The words blurred as her heart raced, but one line stood out. To Jacob Harrison and his wife, Vanessa Harrison. "This can't be real," Sophia whispered, her voice cracking. "My father wouldn't." "Your father," Vanessa interrupted, "trusted Jacob like family. We've been a part of his life for years, Sophia. It's only fair." Jacob finally spoke, his voice hesitant. "Sophia, it's not like that. Dad, Henry, wanted us to have a share." He said it himself. Sophia's disbelief hardened into anger. "He said no such thing. This is his home, his legacy. You have no right." Vanessa stepped closer, her smile turning icy. "I'd suggest you consult a lawyer if you're so confident, but I'll save you the trouble. Everything's already in motion." I'd start packing if I were you. Sophia's hands clenched into fists as Vanessa and Jacob turned to leave, their smugness like a stain on her father's memory. She stood there, the so-called will shaking in her grasp, fury and doubt battling within her. She knew her father better than anyone, didn't she? He wouldn't have left her like this, stripped of the home they'd shared, the garden they'd built together. Yet as much as her heart rejected the possibility, the paper in her hand loomed like a shadow over her certainty. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The air in Henry's study was thick with memories. Sophia stood at the doorway, hesitant to disturb the quiet sanctuary her father had cherished. The shelves were lined with books, their spines worn and familiar, while his desk was a carefully arranged chaos of papers, pens, and mementos. The room still carried the faint scent of his pipe tobacco, a reminder of evenings spent with him as he shared stories and wisdom over a chessboard. Sophia stepped inside, her fingers grazing the edge of the leather chair where he used to sit. Grief tightened her chest, but anger fueled her movements. She had to find something, anything, to prove that the will Vanessa flaunted was a fabrication. She started with the desk, pulling open drawers and sifting through papers, receipts, notes, and sketches. Henry had always been meticulous about his records. But as the minutes ticked by, she found nothing of significance. Frustration bubbled beneath her skin, threatening to overwhelm her resolve. It wasn't until she moved to the bookshelf that she noticed it, a small frame tucked behind a row of books. She pulled it out, revealing a photograph of her father standing beside a younger man in a tailored suit. The man's face was unfamiliar, but there was a warmth in Henry's expression that struck her. Beneath the photo, in her father's familiar handwriting, were the words, "Trust always needs a plan." Sophia turned the frame over, her heart racing. Taped to the back was a folded piece of paper. With trembling hands, she peeled it off and unfolded it, revealing a note scrawled in Henry's handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means the plan has begun. Call Mason. He'll know what to do." Her breath caught. Mason. The name was familiar. Mason Carter, the family's lawyer and a longtime friend of her father. She remembered meeting him at holiday gatherings, his sharp wit and steady demeanor a comforting presence. Without wasting another moment, Sophia pulled out her phone and dialed the number she found in one of Henry's address books. The line clicked after a few rings. "Mason Carter speaking." "It's Sophia," she said, her voice trembling. "Henry's daughter." There was a pause before Mason responded, his tone softening. "Sophia, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father was an incredible man." "Thank you," she said, swallowing the lump in her throat. "But I think something's wrong. Vanessa and Jacob, they're claiming they have a will that gives them my father's estate. I found a note from him saying I should call you. He mentioned a plan." Mason's voice grew serious. "Sophia, listen to me carefully. Your father reached out to me a few months before he passed. He was worried about something like this happening. He didn't trust Jacob or Vanessa. He suspected they might try to manipulate things after he was gone." Sophia's grip on the phone tightened. "Do you have the real will?" "I do," Mason confirmed. "And it's nothing like what they're claiming. But there's more to this, Sophia. Your father wanted to protect you, and he went to great lengths to make sure you'd have what you need to fight back." "What do I do now?" "Come to my office tomorrow," Mason said. "Bring the fake will they showed you. I'll explain everything then." Sophia ended the call, her mind spinning. The photograph, the note, the lawyer, it all pointed to something bigger than she'd anticipated. Her father had known there would be betrayal, and he had prepared for it. As she stared at the photograph, Sophia felt the weight of her father's faith in her. He had left her the tools, but it was up to her to use them. The fight was just beginning. Sophia sat across from Mason in his neatly organized office, her hands gripping the fake will Vanessa had presented. The warm morning sunlight streaming through the window did little to ease the tension coiled in her chest. Mason leaned forward, his gaze steady, the weight of what he was about to say reflected in his somber expression. "Your father was a man who trusted carefully," Mason began, unfolding a folder on his desk. "He believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, but he wasn't blind to their intentions. A few months ago, he came to me with concerns about Jacob and Vanessa. Sophia's heart sank. He knew they were planning something? Mason nodded. He suspected it. Jacob's betrayal during your marriage was a blow to him, not just as your father, but as someone who considered Jacob family. When Vanessa came into the picture, your father saw patterns he couldn't ignore: her charm, her interest in the family's finances, the way she pushed Jacob to reconnect with him. Henry wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but he trusted his instincts. Mason pulled out a sealed envelope and handed it to Sophia. This is the updated will your father had me draft. It's legitimate, signed, and notarized just weeks before he passed. Sophia hesitated, her fingers brushing against the crisp edge of the envelope. What does it say? The majority of your father's estate, including the house and gardens, is left solely to you, Mason explained. However, your father anticipated that someone might contest the will, especially Vanessa, so he added a secret clause, a safeguard. Sophia leaned forward, her breath catching. What kind of safeguard? Mason opened another folder, revealing a copy of the secret clause. Your father specified that any attempt to manipulate or contest his will would trigger an automatic investigation into the claimant's actions. If fraud or coercion is discovered, the claimant forfeits all rights to the estate. Essentially, Henry built a trap. Sophia's eyes widened as the weight of Mason's words settled over her. He planned for this. He did, Mason affirmed. He wanted to ensure that you would be protected no matter what. Henry trusted you to fight for his legacy, and he gave you the tools to do it. Sophia held the envelope close, her resolve hardening. Vanessa and Jacob might think they had won, but her father's foresight had already set their downfall in motion. That evening, Sophia returned to her father's study, Mason's words echoing in her mind. He had trusted her to uncover the truth, but where could she begin? She paced the room, her eyes scanning the familiar surroundings until they landed on the old wooden safe tucked in the corner. Her father had always referred to it as his vault of secrets, a place where he kept important documents and keepsakes. Kneeling in front of it, Sophia ran her fingers over the worn brass dial. Her heart raced as she twisted the combination, a sequence she remembered from her childhood, the years of her parents' wedding, her birth, and her father's. The lock clicked open, and the door creaked ajar, revealing a stack of folders and a small black USB drive sitting neatly atop them. She carefully lifted the contents out, her eyes catching the bold heading on the first folder, Last Will and Testament of Henry Collins, amended. Relief and vindication surged through her. This was it, the real will Mason had mentioned. Beneath the will were additional documents, typed reports, screenshots of emails, and a ledger. Sophia's hands trembled as she flipped through them, her stomach churning with every damning detail. One report described Vanessa meeting with a bank employee, captured in a grainy photo alongside a briefcase of cash. Another documented Jacob entering her father's office late one evening, a pen in hand, his expression tense. The USB caught her attention next. Plugging it into her laptop, Sophia's breath hitched as video footage filled the screen. In the first clip, Vanessa could be seen slipping a wad of cash to a banker. Make sure the signatures match, Vanessa's voice purred. In another clip, Jacob was seated at Henry's desk, signing papers under the dim glow of a desk lamp. Sophia felt fury and determination intertwine as she stared at the evidence. Her father had anticipated their betrayal, and now she held the proof to expose them. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was a battle for Henry's honor. Reading Sophia sat in Mason's office, the desk between them covered in folders, documents, and the USB drive that had become the cornerstone of their plan. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of a photograph showing Vanessa handing cash to a banker, a chilling reminder of the extent of her manipulation. Mason leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression steady and resolute. "We have everything we need," he said, gesturing to the evidence. The amended will, the secret clause, and proof of their fraud. Now, we just need to present it strategically. Sophia's brow furrowed. Strategically? Mason nodded. We need them to walk into their own trap. If we reveal our hand too soon, they might try to shift blame or destroy evidence. The goal is to let them believe they've won until it's too late to back out. Sophia's lips tightened. How do we do that? I've scheduled the will reading for this Friday, Mason explained. Vanessa and Jacob's lawyer has already confirmed their attendance. I've also arranged for a neutral location, a conference room at the courthouse, and invited a few reporters. Reporters? Sophia's stomach churned at the thought. Yes, Mason said firmly. This isn't just about exposing their fraud. It's about protecting your father's legacy. If this becomes public, they won't be able to quietly manipulate the narrative. Sophia nodded slowly, understanding the importance of transparency, but still feeling the weight of what was to come. Mason continued, his tone softening. During the reading, I'll present the fake will first. Let them celebrate. Let them believe they've won. That's when we introduce the secret clause and the evidence. The moment they accept their supposed inheritance, they'll incriminate themselves. Sophia leaned forward, determination replacing her hesitation. And what happens after that? We file for immediate revocation of their claims and initiate legal proceedings, Mason said. Their actions will be fully exposed, and the real will, your father's true intentions, will be upheld. Sophia exhaled deeply, her hands steadying as she straightened in her chair. Let's do it. Mason gave her a small smile. Good. Just remember, Sophia, this isn't just a legal battle. It's about standing up for what's right. Your father would be proud of you. As Sophia left the office, her mind raced with the plan. She could already picture Vanessa's smug smile turning to shock as the evidence unfolded. Henry's words echoed in her mind. Trust always needs a plan. That Friday would be the day the truth emerged, and Sophia was ready to face it head-on. The conference room hummed with anticipation. Reporters adjusted their cameras, and the murmur of low conversations filled the air as Sophia sat at the far end of the table, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. Mason was beside her, his expression calm, his presence grounding her. Across the room sat Vanessa and Jacob, their lawyer perched beside them with an air of smug confidence. Vanessa's sharp heels clicked against the floor as she crossed her legs and leaned back in her chair, her crimson lips curling into a smirk. Let's get this over with, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. Mason ignored her, rising to his feet and clearing his throat. Thank you all for being here today. As the attorney for the late Henry Collins, I will be reading his final will and testament. He paused, his voice steady but deliberate. This is a moment to honor Henry's legacy and ensure his wishes are respected. He opened a folder, pulling out the first document, the fake will Vanessa and Jacob had presented. Sophia felt her stomach churn as Mason began reading. To my trusted son-in-law, Jacob Harrison, and his wife, Vanessa Harrison, I leave the majority of my estate, including the family home and gardens, in recognition of their long-standing relationship and support. Vanessa's smirk widened, and Jacob shifted in his seat, trying to suppress a smile. Sophia's fists clenched beneath the table as the room buzzed with the sound of pens scratching on notepads and cameras clicking. When Mason finished reading, Vanessa leaned forward with a falsely gracious tone. Well, I must say, we're honored by Henry's trust in us. He was a wonderful man. Mason didn't flinch. Instead, he set the fake will aside and picked up another document. Before we proceed, I need to introduce an addendum to Henry's will. Vanessa's smile faltered. Addendum? Yes, Mason said smoothly, pulling a sealed envelope from his briefcase. 3 weeks before his passing, Henry requested a secret clause be added to his estate plan. This clause specifies that any claimants to his estate who engage in fraudulent or coercive behavior will immediately forfeit all inheritance rights. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the cameras. Vanessa's gaze darted to Jacob, her mask of confidence beginning to crack. Mason continued, unsealing the envelope and placing its contents, a USB drive and a series of documents, on the table. Henry was a meticulous man. He anticipated that there might be attempts to manipulate his legacy, and he took steps to protect it. Vanessa's lawyer stood abruptly. This is highly irregular. We haven't been informed of this clause. You would have been, Mason interrupted, if your clients had disclosed the existence of a legitimate will. The room erupted into chaos as the evidence played out on the projector. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and the hum of murmured disbelief filled the air. Vanessa stood frozen, her perfect composure shattered. Jacob, pale and visibly shaken, kept his eyes on the table, his hands gripping the edge as if it could anchor him. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the spectacle unfold. For a moment, she felt a strange sense of vindication, but it was quickly overshadowed by anger. These two had waltzed into her father's legacy, expecting to walk away with everything he'd built, leaving her with nothing but ashes. Mason remained calm amidst the storm, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "Order, please!" He turned to Vanessa and Jacob, his gaze sharp. Under the terms of the clause, any evidence of fraud or coercion triggers an immediate forfeiture of rights to the estate. This evidence not only proves your guilt, but also opens the door to criminal charges. Vanessa snapped out of her daze, her voice rising with panic. "This is a setup! Henry hated you, Sophia. He didn't trust you to manage his estate. That's why he left it to us." Mason arched an eyebrow, his calm demeanor unshaken. "That's an interesting claim, considering Henry explicitly recorded his reasons for excluding you both in the message we just watched." Jacob finally looked up, his voice trembling. "Vanessa, stop. There's no point." She rounded on him, her voice sharp. "No point? Don't you dare fold now, Jacob. We've worked too hard for this." "Hard work?" Mason interjected, his voice laced with irony. "I'd call it something else entirely." He motioned to the security guards stationed near the doors. "Please escort these individuals out. Law enforcement will take over from here." The guards stepped forward, and Vanessa recoiled, her heels scraping against the floor as she backed away. "You can't do this. This isn't over," she screamed, her voice shrill. Sophia watched in silence as they were led out of the room, Vanessa protesting every step of the way while Jacob walked quietly, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The sight should have been satisfying, but it left Sophia with a strange hollowness instead. As the room began to settle, Mason turned to Sophia, his tone softer now. "It's over. They're out of the picture, and your father's wishes are intact." Sophia nodded, her hands still trembling. "I should feel relieved, shouldn't I?" Mason gave her a knowing look. "You've been through a lot, Sophia. Relief will come, but so will other feelings. It's okay to be angry. They hurt you, and they tried to take something that was rightfully yours." She swallowed hard, her gaze drifting to the projector screen, now blank, but still echoing the images of betrayal. They didn't just try to take his estate. They tried to erase him, everything he worked for, everything he believed in. Mason placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Your father knew this might happen, which is why he put these safeguards in place. He trusted you to protect his legacy, and you did. You honored him today." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, a mix of gratitude and grief. I wish he didn't have to plan for something like this. I wish he were still here." Mason's voice softened. "He is, Sophia. In the gardens he built, in the memories you carry, and in the strength he gave you. Henry's presence isn't gone, it's just changed." Sophia nodded, her chest tightening as the truth settled over her. Her father had prepared her for this moment, not just with legal plans, but with the values he had instilled in her. As reporters began to file out and the room emptied, Sophia stood by the window, looking out at the clear blue sky. The storm had passed, but its marks lingered. She felt the sting of betrayal and the weight of justice. But beneath it all, a seed of hope was beginning to take root. She turned to Mason, a spark of determination returning to her eyes. "What's next?" Mason smiled. "Next we rebuild, together." And for the first time in weeks, Sophia felt like she could finally breathe again. Sophia sat alone in her father's study, the weight of the day pressing heavily on her shoulders. The desk in front of her was littered with papers, each one more damning than the last. The documents Mason had presented during the will reading had been enough to expose Vanessa and Jacob's fraud. But as Sophia dug deeper into the files left behind by her father, the picture became even darker. Her fingers trembled as she opened a thick folder labeled Contingency, Vanessa and Jacob in her father's precise handwriting. Inside were detailed notes, photographs, and emails, each one a thread in the web of deceit Vanessa had spun. The first page was a timeline, meticulously documented by Henry. It began 3 years earlier, just before Sophia had discovered Jacob's affair with Vanessa. According to the notes, Vanessa had intentionally targeted Jacob, knowing his connection to the Collins family. Henry's observations painted a chilling portrait of her calculated moves, ingratiating herself with Jacob, pushing him to reconcile with Henry after the divorce, and ultimately maneuvering him into marriage. Sophia's heart twisted as she read the notes. Her father had seen it all, but he hadn't intervened, at least not directly. Instead, he had quietly gathered evidence, knowing that confronting them outright would only push them to act faster. His decision to play the long game had been his way of protecting Sophia, even if it meant enduring their betrayal in silence. Her stomach churned as she turned to the next page, a detailed plan written in Vanessa's handwriting. It outlined steps for taking control of Henry's estate. The language was cold and clinical, devoid of humanity. 1. Secure Jacob's trust and connection to Henry. 2. Influence Henry's perception of Sophia's ability to manage the estate. 3. Obtain access to Henry's financial records and assets. 4. Eliminate potential obstacles, Sophia included. Sophia's breath caught. Eliminate obstacles? She flipped to the next page where a chilling memo awaited her. Vanessa had written about ways to undermine Sophia, including fabricating claims of financial irresponsibility and even planting evidence to suggest that Sophia was unfit to inherit. But the most horrifying detail lay at the bottom of the page. Once estate control is secured, consider measures to ensure Sophia doesn't interfere. The vague wording was enough to send a shiver down Sophia's spine. She knew what it meant. Vanessa had considered more than just legal manipulation. She had been willing to take drastic, potentially dangerous steps to ensure her control over the estate. Sophia's mind raced as she pieced it all together. Vanessa hadn't just been after the money. She had been building a plan to erase Sophia entirely. Every move, befriending Jacob, manipulating Henry, even taunting Sophia with the fake will, had been part of a calculated scheme to seize power. Her hands clenched into fists, the papers crumpling slightly under her grip. Anger bubbled within her, but beneath it was a profound sadness. How had Jacob allowed this to happen? The man she had once loved had become a pawn in Vanessa's game, too blinded by his own weakness to see the damage he was causing. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Mason stepped in, his expression cautious. "You've been in here a while. Are you okay?" Sophia exhaled shakily, holding up the documents. "Did you know about this? About how far she was willing to go?" Mason's lips pressed into a thin line. "I knew she was dangerous, Sophia. That's why your father insisted on gathering so much evidence. He wanted to make sure there was no room for doubt when the truth came out." "She wanted to destroy me," Sophia said quietly, her voice wavering. "Not just take the estate, she wanted me out of the picture entirely." Mason's jaw tightened. "And she would have, if not for your father. He saw through her from the beginning. Every safeguard he put in place was for you." Sophia looked down at the notes again, her heart heavy. "It's not just the betrayal that hurts. It's knowing that someone I once trusted let this happen. Jacob, he could have stopped her." "Maybe," Mason said gently, "but Jacob isn't the man you thought he was. Vanessa saw his weaknesses and exploited them. That doesn't excuse him, but it explains how he got caught in her web." Sophia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "She didn't just betray me. She betrayed my father's trust, his legacy. She tried to tear apart everything he built. And she failed," Mason said firmly. "Because of him and because of you." Sophia closed the folder, her anger hardening into resolve. "I won't let her win. I won't let what she did define my father's memory or my future." Mason placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You won't have to. The evidence is undeniable, and justice is already in motion. The rest is up to you, to rebuild and move forward." As Mason left the room, Sophia sat in the silence, her gaze drifting to the garden beyond the window. The roses her father had planted swayed gently in the breeze, their beauty untouched by the storm that had tried to uproot their foundation. Vanessa had tried to destroy her, but Sophia realized now that her strength lay in something Vanessa could never take: her father's love and the values he had passed on. Those were the roots that would hold her steady as she faced whatever came next. The golden light of late afternoon streamed through the windows of Henry's study, casting long shadows over the desk where Sophia sat. Once filled with the comforting presence of her father, now felt quiet and still. But as Sophia opened the small envelope she had found tucked in one of the desk drawers, it was as if Henry's voice filled the space once more. The envelope was addressed to her in her father's steady handwriting, the ink slightly faded but unmistakable. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal, revealing a folded sheet of paper. She unfolded it carefully, the familiar scent of his stationery bringing a lump to her throat. The letter began simply, "My dearest Sophia, if you're reading this, it means the plan has come to fruition and the truth has been revealed. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything sooner, but I needed to ensure you were protected, even if I couldn't be there to do it myself." Sophia blinked back tears as she continued reading, her father's voice echoing in her mind. "I know this has been hard on you. Losing me, facing betrayal from those you once trusted, and carrying the weight of this fight. But I want you to remember something, my Sophie. Strength doesn't come from avoiding hardship. It comes from facing it with grace, resilience, and a belief that good will always prevail." The words struck a chord deep within her, resonating with the lessons he had always tried to impart. "The gardens we built together taught me so much about life. Each plant, each bloom, carried its own story, some of struggle, some of triumph. I planted those gardens not just for beauty, but as a reminder that even in the harshest winters, there is a promise of spring. You, Sophia, are like the strongest of those blooms. You've weathered the storms, and now it's time for you to thrive." Sophia paused, her fingers brushing against the paper as if to feel the weight of his words. Her father had always seen her as stronger than she saw herself, and now, in his absence, his belief in her felt like a lifeline. "I left you the tools to protect our legacy, but I never wanted you to be tied to the past. Use what I've given you to build something new, something that reflects the incredible woman you've become. Remember, the world needs people like you, people who see beauty in broken places and have the courage to create something better." The final lines of the letter were simple, yet profound. "Trust always needs a plan, Sophie, but life needs faith. Faith in yourself, in others, and in the power of good to overcome. I have no doubt you will make me proud. I always have been proud of you. With all my love, always." "Dad," Sophia folded the letter carefully, holding it against her chest as fresh tears streamed down her face. The sadness of his absence mingled with the warmth of his words, creating a bittersweet ache in her heart. In that moment, she felt something shift, a quiet strength rising within her. Henry's faith in her wasn't just a comfort, it was a call to action. He hadn't just left her a legacy to protect. He had left her a challenge, to grow, to build, and to create a life that honored the values he had instilled in her. As she placed the letter back in the envelope, Sophia looked out the study window at the garden beyond. The roses her father had tended were in full bloom, their vibrant colors a testament to the resilience and care they had received. It was time, she realized, to nurture her own garden, both the literal one outside and the life waiting for her beyond the walls of this house. Her father had given her the tools, and now it was up to her to use them. The first rays of morning light filtered through the trees as Sophia stood in the center of her father's beloved garden. The soft hum of bees and the gentle rustling of leaves created a melody that felt almost sacred. The roses, though still beautiful, bore the signs of neglect during the chaos of recent weeks. Petals lay scattered on the soil, weeds crept along the edges, and the once pristine paths were overgrown. Sophia knelt by a cluster of Henry's favorite white roses, brushing her fingers over the delicate petals. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "A garden isn't just a place for flowers, Sophie. It's a place for people, for hope, for life." That morning, she made her decision. This garden, her father's masterpiece, would not just be restored, it would be transformed. Sophia began by reaching out to the local community. She placed a notice in the town square and shared her vision on social media, turning the garden into a public sanctuary where families could gather, children could play, and people could find solace in its beauty. She named the project Henry's Haven, a tribute to the man whose love had cultivated not just the garden, but the spirit of generosity she hoped to share with others. To her surprise, the response was overwhelming. Neighbors, strangers, and even local businesses came forward to help. Volunteers arrived with gloves and shovels, their laughter and chatter filling the once quiet paths. Sophia worked alongside them, her hands in the soil, feeling a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. Slowly, the garden came back to life. The roses bloomed brighter, the paths were cleared, and new flowers were planted alongside Henry's originals. A small pond was restored, and benches were placed under the shade of oak trees. Each detail was infused with care, echoing the lessons Henry had taught her: patience, resilience, and the importance of nurturing what matters. As Sophia stood at the entrance of Henry's Haven on its opening day, she was overwhelmed by the sight of families wandering the paths, children laughing among the flowers, and older couples sitting on benches holding hands. It was everything her father had dreamed of and more. This was more than a garden. It was a legacy. Not just of Henry's love for his family and community, but of the values he had instilled in her. Sophia realized that the greatest inheritance her father had left wasn't wealth or land. It was the belief that beauty could thrive in broken places and that hope could bloom even after the harshest winters. And in that moment, she knew she was ready to face the future, one blossom at a time. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of loyalty, love, and the incredible bonds between humans and animals. Join us as we share stories that remind us of what truly matters in life. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment.